And it's a great pleasure and an utmost honor indeed to be able to introduce our distinguished guest tonight, Seán Hewitt, a celebrated author, an eminent scholar and literary critic, simply a bright new star on the Irish literary and academic firmament. Seán is the author of John Millington Synge, Nature, Politics, Modernism, published with Oxford University Press last year. That's been hailed as the first and most important monograph in decades on this important figure in the development of modern Irish literature. And Seán gave a fascinating talk about mysticism and the occult in Synge yesterday at Charles University, to which many of you were present. So I'm not wondering why you are back. He was brilliant yesterday. In 2020, Cape Poetry published his first poetry collection, Tongues of Fire, to great critical acclaim. And in the summer this year, Seán's memoir, All Down Darkness White, was published by Jonathan Cape and Penguin Press. Seán Hewitt is the recipient of many awards, including the Laureate Prize for 2021 and the prestigious Rooney Prize for Irish Literature in 2022. And though he grew up in England, his mother being Irish and his father English, Seán now lives in Ireland and is a lecturer in modern British and Irish literature at Trinity College, Dublin. And we are extremely honoured to have Seán as our guest tonight, and very grateful to the Department of Foreign Affairs, Ireland, and the Irish Embassy in Prague for their long-term and generous support, which made Seán's visit possible as well. And tonight, Seán will read to us from his collection, The Tongues of Fire, and his brand new memoir with the impossible to remember title, All Down Darkness White. I have been practicing, as you can see. And the title, however, becomes less esoteric when you realize that it's been adopted from a poem by Gerald Manley Hopkins. Not that any poem by Gerald Manley Hopkins could or would want to explain anything about itself or anything else. The title of the poem by Hopkins, who maintains a sustained presence in Seán's text, the memoir, as a kind of a cicerone or a light in darkness. The title of the poem in Seán's text, where the words All Down Darkness White come from, is indeed Lantern Out of Doors. It's a poem about the unknowingness of others and ourselves, about the intimate proximity of strangers and strangeness. From Hopkins's view, it's definitely a poem about Christ, but it's also a poem about ghosts, about companionship without words, as well as being a poem about words as such. And it may well be, like so many poems by Hopkins, that it's a poem about everything. It wants us to see, or rather to hear, the world in its entirety. And maybe, even though in many respects Seán's poems are nothing like Hopkins's, they have something in common with them. And by this something, I mean this capacity to make us perceive the world in its immediate, evident splendor and pain, as well as taking us to its not so obvious or hidden dimensions. With Seán's poems, we often find ourselves out of doors, often at night or dusk, often in some kind of semi-urban, semi-natural environment. And this kind of setting informs also the memoir. And it's in the memoir, perhaps even more so than in the poems, that the dusky, and I'm quoting, part on the town's outer limits, unquote, comes across as not necessarily a place of choice, but a necessity. Seán may have received the world's biggest eco-poetry prize, the Resurgence Prize in 2017, but his poetry is not in any sense ecological, meaning it doesn't urge us to act on behalf of the suffocating planet. Or maybe it is ecological in the best possible sense, in helping us realize to what extent we are one with the world around us. I'd even hesitate describing him as a nature poet, though he often resorts to nature to speak of human nature. His many images of woods, trees, leaves, wildflowers, and water have always reminded me of the writings of another favorite poet of mine, that is Oswald, who explicitly rejects this distinction between nature and civilization as preposterous and pointless. The stuff of her poetry, she claims, is the world around us. And like Oswald, Seán Hewitt pays homage to that which is transient, but leaves a lasting impression. And translating that transience and lasting impression into words needs, in Oswald's, as Oswald explains, another language, the language of poetry. And it's in this sense that Seán Hewitt has been using the language of poetry to translate into words this and the other worlds that lie just below the threshold of consciousness, or that lie at the forefront of a consciousness, an experience, but have rarely found expression. In Seán's work, the latter situation has often been figured as a journey to dark, obscure places on the margins of cities, a journey that his personas undertake not in order to find a solution of the unknown, but to come into their own, to get away from a society in which it is impossible to live as a gay or queer person, openly, happily, or just normally. What Seán's writings have made us realize, however, with intimate urgency, is that this is not a literary trope, but it has made us realize how it has been an inevitable part of an experience that has been far too often pushed into the dark and the realm of the unspeakable. This evening is going to be conducted in English, but Seán's readings will be accompanied by translations into Czech, and I have been extremely fortunate to have been joined in providing the translations by two of my dear colleagues, Lenka Liebichová and Martin Světlík. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Seán Hewitt.
It's such a pleasure to be here. This is my first time in Prague. I'd like to thank Daniela for inviting me and Andre as well, of course, Martin and Lenka, and Daniela for translating my work. I think apparently I've given them a tough job and poems. I'm going to start off by reading from the memoir. This is it with its untranslatable title, Bound in Ball Down Darkness White. The book starts off, it's a memoir, but it has, as Daniela said, a number of ghosts that run through it. So it kind of exists on the border of fact and fiction. It starts off in a cemetery in Liverpool, which is a city in the northwest of England. It's an old port city and a city of empire. And it starts off in a cemetery there, so I'll read you the beginning of this. And then I believe Lenka will read you the translation, so don't worry if this all seems completely unintelligible. Okay. The oratory of St. James's Cemetery in Liverpool has no windows along the whole length of its outer walls, only a long rectangular skylight, its leaded panes half mossed over, lets the winter sun reach down and touch the white marble statues staring blankly inside. A mortuary chapel, but long closed up. Its coffered ceiling and tall carved columns are mostly in shadow. Years ago, as the great homes of the city were pulled down stone by stone, the monuments of proud families, monuments of terracotta and marble and bronze, were hoisted here and locked away, and so the wealth of the city, wrenched from far-off backers and furnished from blood, was hidden and so forgotten. And as the years went by, other things were hidden here too. Some, like the terraced slums of the poor and their wash houses, were razed. Others, the orphanages and workhouses, the asylums and homes for the destitute, were emptied one by one, turned by sharp-suited businessmen into flats or bars or restaurants, where the names of the dead, engraved in plaques on newly pointed walls, were the climbing holes of a city once again dragging itself up out of its own grave. And so the churches and the crypts were closed, and the docks shut down, and the shackles shipped and left on other shores, and the subterranean tunnels of the catacombs were filled in with stones, and the quarry was planted with oaks and with sycamores, and with the bodies of the dead. And it was in this way that the ghosts of the city were parcelled off, ushered from the streets into derelict buildings, made to stand in exhibition cases, hurried into the pages of books and diaries, and folded away. For, after all, ghosts can only live in the darkness, and once the dark places are closed up, like cast iron locks, bolted fast, it is easy for those who do not live with them to pretend that ghosts do not exist at all. Past midnight, one mid-January, standing in the church gardens, I felt the wind blow up from the river Mersey, weighted with Atlantic salt. It blustered up to the city, battering the red bricks of the warehouses on the dock, rattling the barred doors of the pump house and the locks of the customs house. I heard it rush southeast between the empty units along St. James's Street, clapping the tattered flags of the Old Sailors' Church and spinning frantically among the Gothic bell turret of St. Vincent's. It rushed up the steep junction of Parkland Street, past the new builds, over the waiting cars of the traffic lights, and then scurried down a tree-tunneled sandstone path into the cathedral cemetery, resting, finally, in a swirl of leaves and a ripple of the spring water by the catacombs, unseen by anyone except a carved angel weeping over a 19th century grave, and the lone figure of a man, me, kneeling and drinking from the water running in runnels down the old cemetery walls. I had come here to meet someone, a man I didn't know, but who was somehow like myself. Above the cemetery gardens, the terrifying neo-Gothic cathedral loomed across the sky, its stained glass half aglow even at this hour. I could almost feel the weight of its shadow, like a body bearing down on mine. To venture into the graveyard, you have first to walk through the tunnel of hollowed rock, its walls lined with old grave slabs and dripping with dank water filtered through the paving stones and tree roots overhead. And at the end of this, where hardly any light can be found after sundown, a little path winds fearlessly on between the hollies and the yews and the leaning granite obelisks. Nearly a century has passed since the last body was interred here, and the lichen has spread over the tombs and onto the once neat etchings of names and dates and Latin mottos and platitudes both sentimental and heartfelt. likened over the staunch Victorian formalities of lives lived in stoicism and resignation, and into the carefully chosen testaments to numberless tragedies and joys given from mother to child, from husband to wife, from friend to friend, and from lover to dearly missed lover. Years ago, the hearse toll, now capped with brick, brought carriages one by one down from the Georgian grandeur of Broughton Street into the cemetery, and now perhaps no one is old enough to remember these dead. At the centre of the cemetery, flowing down into a square pool between the laid-out gravestones, a little spring uncovered in the 18th century runs on, unperturbed, trickling over the luminous green growths of liverwort and algae and the bricked-up far wall of the plot. And on this January night, when the only living inhabitant of the graveyard is a single man drinking from the spring, anyone might come down here and walk under the silvered boughs, hearing that gentle stream, and imagine all the souls here cooped up in the soil, passing from root to root, moving slowly in the underworld of the earth. At the heart of it all is water, its slow leak along the walls, its passage through all the plants and trees and mosses, its movement through the apertures of the shale embankments, its shielding under the moon on the marble of the family vault. Laden with iron, the water is sharp and metallic and tastes faintly of blood. Some in the city believe in its healing powers and follow the words of the inscription carved above the spring, which speaks in the voice of water of the endless cycle of giving. Christian reader, view in me an emblem of true charity, who freely what I have bestow, though neither hurt nor seemed to flow. I, like others, held closer to a different truth, that the water contains the souls of the dead trapped in the graveyard, and that it turns black like blood when boiled. Ghosts in the water, ghosts in the blood. Everything, once you start to look, is haunted. And so perhaps it was fitting that I came here that evening, unsure of where else to go, feeling lonely and shut out from the daylight world, the downward paths from Prince's Park leading me on into this navel of the city. An unsettling place to be after dark, not so much for any fear of the dead, but of the living. The men I had seen huddling around a lighter, their square of tinfoil glinting, the occasional hunched figure wandering, a group of drunks walking the pavement of Hope Street, faces hot with wine. It would be tempting to say that it was a sense of communion that drew me down into the gardens, a sense that down here with the dead was where I belonged, hollowed out, tired, looking for something in this wooded grove swapped amongst the townhouses near busy roads. But other urges drove me too, onto the little spring, like a pilgrim to the underworld, my phone's light held up to the darkness, my golden bell.
Kaple na hřbitově svatého Jakuba v Liverpoolu nemá po celé délce vnější zdi žádná okna. Jen skrze skla dlouhého obdélníkového světlíku napůl zarostlého mechem se může proniknout zimní slunce a dotknout se soch z bílého mramoru, které tu němě zírají do šera. Zádušní kaple, už dávno nepoužívaná, její kazetový stropy, vysoké tesané sloupy, jsou z velké části zahájeny stínem. Před lety, když ve městě jednu po druhé bouraly majestátní rezidence, sem všechny tyhle pomníky pyšných rodů, artefakty z terakoty, mramoru a bronzu shromáždili a pečlivě je zamkli. A takto tohle bohatství města, vyrvané z lůna vzdálených krajin a vykoupené krví schovali a časem na ně zapomněli. Jak roky plynuly, stejný osud potkal i další státy. Některé, jako chudinské řadové domky a prádelny, srovnaly se zemí. Jiné jako sirotčince, útulky pro mimojedné a strádající a ústavy pro choromyslné a chudobince se jedna po druhé zvolna vyprázdnily a podnikatelé v perfektně padnoucích oblecích je proměnili v byty, bary nebo restaurace, kde jména zemřelých vyrytá v pamětních deskách na čerstvě omíchnutých zdeb sloužila jako záchytné body pro město, které se znovu škrábalo z vlastního hrobu. A tak se kostely a krypty uzavřely, doky zrušily, úvazové kruhy pro lodě skončily na skládkách na dalekých březích, podzemní tunely a katakomby byly zasypané kamením a lom se zaplnil duby, platany a mrtvými těly. Právě takhle přízraky města naporcovaly, stáhly z ulic do schátralých budov a výstavních vitrín a uložili na stránky knih a deníků, protože přízraky konec konců přežívají jen v temnotách. A když ta temná místa uzavřete a těžké kovové zámky zamknete na několik západů, mohou pak lidé, kteří s přízraky nežijí, snadno předstírat, že neexistují. Jedné lednové půlnoci jsem stál v kostelní zahradě a cítil jsem na tvářích vítr vanoucí od řeky Mersey, stěžklý solí Atlantiku. Volákal směrem k městu, narážel o skladišní budovy v docích, rachotil západkou vratu přečerpávací stanice i zámky u celního rynku. Slyšel jsem, jak lomozí směrem na jeho východ mezi prázdnými domy na St. Gypsy Street, jak střepotá potrhanými vlajkami na starém námořním kostele a jak se pak zběsile točí ve zvonici svatého Vincenta. Přehnal se strmým řežovatkou na Parliament Street, kolem novostaveb a aut stojících na světlech a pak prolétl tunelem stromu na stezce z pískovcových šlapáků, vedoucí na hřbitě katedrály. Tam konečně spočinul, poté co rozvířil listí a zčeřil tuňku vedle katakomb. Neviděn nikým, kromě anděla plačícího nad hrobem z 19. století a osamoceného muže, totiž mě, který jsem v kleče pil vodu stékající po staré hřbitovnosti. Měl jsem se tu setkat s mužem, kterého jsem předtím nikdy neviděl, ale který se mi svým způsobem podobal. Nad hřbitovními zahradami se proti obloze strašidelně rýsovala novogotická katedrála, její vitráže lehce planoucí do noci. Skoro jsem cítil tíhu jejího stínu, jako by na mě ležela váha něčího těla. Abyste se na hřbitov dostali, musíte nejdřív projít tunelem vyhloubeným ve skále. Jeho stěny jsou lemované starými náhrobky a skapává z nich zatuchlá voda protékající dlážděním a kořeny stromů nad vámi. A na konci, v místech, kam po západu slunce neproniká skoro žádné světlo, se mezi cesmínami, tisy a nakloněnými žulovými obelisky statečně vyne stezka. Od doby, kdy tu pohřbili posledního neboštíka, uplynulo už téměř století a lišejník pokryl hrobky, i když si úhledně vyrytá jména, data, latinská mota a citáty, některé klišovité, jiné upřímné. Lišejník překrývá viktoriánské oficiality o osudech prožitých se stoickou odevzdaností i pečlivě formulovaná svědectví o bezpočtu smutků i radostí, sdělovaná matkou dítěti, manželem manželce, přítelem příteli a jedním milencem druhému. Před lety jsem na hřbitov průjezdem dnes už zazděným přijížděli rovnou z georgiánské nádhery Rodney Street jeden za druhým pohřební kočáry. A přitom dnes už se nejspíš nenajde nikdo, kdo by tyhle mrtvé pamatoval. Uprostřed hřbitova se do čtvercové tůňky mezi náhrobky vlévá malý pramen, odkrytý v 18. století. Nerušeně stéká po jasně zeleném koberci z játrovek a řas po cihlové zdi na kraji pozemku. A téhle lednové noci, kdy jediným živoucím obyvatelem hřbitova je osamocený muž pijící z pramene, by se mohl kdokoliv přijít, projít pod stříbřitými větvemi, uslyšet ten jemně zurčící pramen a představovat si, jak se všechny ty duše uvězněné v hlíně podzemí pomalu přelévají od kořene ke koření. Ve středu toho všeho je voda, pomalu prosakující z tmy, protékající mezi rostlinami, mechem a stromy, procházející skrz otvory v břidlicových stěnách, lesknoucí se ve světlu měsíce na mramoru rodinné hrobky. Voda je ostře železitá a chutná po kovu a trochu jako krev. Někteří z města věří, že má léčivou moc a řídí se nápisem vytesaným nad pramenem, který hlasem vody promlouvá o nekonečném koloběhu lásky. Křesťane, hleď a spatříš ve mně milosrdenství Matky Země. Co mám, to bez váhání dám, ač nespatřen tu protékám. Já, stejně jako mnozí jiní, věřím spíš něčemu jinému, že v té vodě žijí duše mrtvých, uvězněné na hřbitově, a že zčerná jako krev, když se uvaří. Přízraky ve vodě, přízraky v krvi. Zjeví se všude, když se začnete pozorněji dívat. A možná to nebyla náhoda, že jsem se toho večera ocitl zrovna Ady. Netušil jsem, kam jinam jít. Byl jsem osamocený a cítil se odříznutý od bdělého světa, když mě svažité cesty z Princess Parku dovedly až sem, k samotnému pupku města. Znepokojivé místo takhle posetmění. Ani ne kvůli strachu z mrtvých, ale spíš ze živých. Z mužů, které jsem viděl srocené kolem zapalovače nad plískavým čtverečkem alibolu, z ojedinělých sklepených zbloudělců, z party opilců s tvářemi zarudlými od vína, které jsem minul na Hope Street. Bylo by lákavé myslet si, že mě do zafrat zavedl nějaký pocit souznění či přesvědčení, že právě tady mezi mrtvými je moje místo. Byl jsem otupělý, vyčerpaný a doufal, že tady v tom lesíku přikrčeném mezi domy a rušnými ulicemi něco najdu. Táhly mě ale i jiné síly. K tomu prameni, jako poutníka k branám podsvětí, s rozsvíceným mobilem jako zlatou ratolestí vstříc temnotě.
It's so wonderful to hear. I'm clearly dealing with a true professional because I noticed the poem rhymed still. So that's not an easy thing to do. Thanks. A lot of this book deals also with translation, but from Swedish to English in this case. So we begin in the graveyard and we introduce ourselves to a number of ghosts that run through the text. But the main story is a sort of love story that breaks down due to a quite severe mental health episode with my partner. So in this section, the two of us attempt to translate a Swedish poem by a poet called Karin Boye, who was around in about the 1930s. And she becomes kind of one of the ghosts in the book as well. So the poems appear in Swedish and in my translations in the books, but I'll just read you the English translation because with Swedish it's embarrassing. Before long, we'd filled half a notebook with scribbled translations. One word would proliferate into others, half a dozen or more meanings or synonyms, none of them quite right in English, none of them correlating exactly in their sounds or associations, like a set of keys that to be quite fit the lock. Elias would remark, this is my partner in the book, Elias would list all of the things each word reminded him of, all the things each word meant, or could mean, in a different formulation, all the ways each one could carry a thought or a feeling and mean something subtly different. Each line of each poem would emerge slowly, changing shape as it arrived, and between us we'd chisel it down to something that suited us both, finding the right words and trying to keep the music of the language, which had a meaning of its own, something that echoed beyond the words and seemed to catch a glimmer of the world behind them. We struggled most over those which meant most, those whose cadence and fragile thought seemed so carefully made, so delicate, that taking it apart and putting it together again risked the soul of it seeping out. One small poem was crystal clear in Swedish, but somehow seemed to crumble in our hands when we tried to lift it onto the new page. Looking back at the notebook now, I can see the crossings out, the places where we'd had to find new words, the lines in which English syntax was too loose, too long for the original thought. Karin Boye's poem is there, copied out on the left-hand page of the notebook, neat and precise. Then pages and pages of our attempts. In the final version, the one we'd been happiest with, we wrote, and that's a translation of Karin Boye's poem. The stillness expanded, tender as a sunlit winter forest. I wonder how I learned to trust myself. How did I find my way? I carried in my hand an etched bowl of ringing glass. Then I walked gently and would not stumble. Then my hand was steadied and would not shake. Then, when I faltered, I was borne by the strength of a fragile sake. It was the final line we couldn't quite get right. That was a line that changed often over the pages, crossed and recrossed, the syntax all wrong, the meaning not quite there. The final line of the original has the speaker overflooded, steadied by concentration, the fragility of the bowl coursing through her, holding her up. So she is borne by the strength of something else, feels it moving through her body and is changed by it. It was too much for me to get into English. The language didn't seem able to hold it. There were many lines like this, many words and ideas we struggled to make new homes. Slowly, each day, lines would emerge between us with Karen as our intercessor. Each poem was like an icon, something we spoke through, something that seemed to crystallize our broken thoughts into forms we could both understand. They were like those etched bowls of ringing glass. We carried them and they steadied us. We let them course through us, feeling them remaking us with their clarity. And in calling up those echoes from another time, in sounding the darkness behind the words for whatever might be found there, it was as though we called up something else too, a ghost to live between us, someone to carry those fragile, shimmering parts of ourselves across to each other. Karen carrying messages like crystal bowls from one of us to the other. In her poems, there were woods, flowers bursting open, the deep, painful recesses of a mind somehow brought onto the page. And when the translation was finished, when we had decided which word went where, had fitted them together as best we could, we read them aloud together and thought, yes, we thought, this is how it is. We are not alone after all.
Netrvalo dlouho a naškrábanými překlady jsme zaplnili půlku sešitu. Jednotlivá slova dávala vzniknout půl tuctu dalších významů anebo synonymů. Žádné z nich ale neznělo v angličtině správně. Žádné přesně neodpovídalo svému zvuku nebo asociacím, jako svazek klíčů, které možná zapadají do zámku, ale dveře neovlivnou. Elias vytvářel seznamy věcí, kterému jednotlivá slova připomínala. Všech jejich skutečných a možných významů v nejrůznějších formulacích, způsobu, jimž každé z nich může vyjadřovat jistou myšlenku nebo pocit a znamenat přitom něco trochu jiného. Jednotlivé verše pomalu dostávaly tvar a současně měnily původní podobu, zatímco my jsme je společně vyprušovali do něčeho, na čem jsme se oba shodli. Jak jsme hledali ta správná slova a snažili se zachovat melodii jazyka, která nesla svůj vlastní význam, jako něco, co se rozlévalo na pozadí slov a zdánlivě odráželo záblesky světa za nimi. Nejvíce jsme se přeli nad těmi, které toho nesly nejvíc. A jejich tempo a křehké myšlenky byly tak opatrně vystavěné, tak zranitelné, že snažit se je rozebrat a zase složit dohromady znamenalo riskovat, že přitom ztratí svou duši. Jedna z těch krátkých básníček se ve švédštině zdála naprosto jasná, ale sypala se nám pod rukama, kdykoliv jsme se ji pokusili přenést na novou stránku. Když se teď do toho sešitu dívám, vidím samé škrty, všechna ta místa, kde jsme museli hledat jiná slova, verše, pro jejichž myšlenku byla anglická syntax příliš volná či příliš rozvláčná. Je tam báseň Kerin boje, pečlivě a úhledně přepsaná na levé stránce sešitu. I won't even attempt the Swedish thing. A pak stránky a stránky našich pokusů. Finální verze, se kterou jsme byli jakž tak spokojeni, zní. Rozhostil se klid, něžný jak zimním sluncem prostoupený les. Jak jsem našla víru v sebe a jak hledala svou cestu. V ruce jsem nesla křišťálovou misku ze zvonivého skla. To proto jsem opatrně našlapovala, abych neklopitla. To proto jsem ruku držela pevně, aby se netřásla. To proto mě, když jsem zakolísal, nesla dál síla křehkosti. Ten poslední verš ne a ne trefy. Právě tenhle řádek se na stránkách často proměňoval, škrtali jsme ho zas a znovu, protože nefungovala syntax a nedařilo se nám zachytit význam. V posledním verši originálu je mluvčí básně nejprve overflowed, tedy zaplavená či přeplněná a hrozí, že se přelije přes okraj, než jí díky pevnému soustředění prostoupí křehkost mísy a drží pevně na nohu. Takže ji nese síla něčeho jiného, co splývá s jejím tělem, až ji to zcela promění. Ať jsme se snažili jakkoliv, nedokázali jsme to do angličtiny všechno dostat. Jako by to ten jazyk nezvládl pojmout. Takových veršů byla přitom spousta. Nespočet slov a myšlenek, s nimiž jsme zápasili, jak jsme se jim snažili vytvořit nový domov. Pomalu, den za dnem jsme spolu vytvářeli verše, přičemž Karin nám dělala prostředníka. Každá báseň byla jako ikona, skrze kterou jsme spolu promlouvali. Jako by v ní naše nesouvislé myšlenky krystalizovaly do podoby, které jsme oba rozuměli. Ony verše byly jako ty křišťálové mísy ze zvonivého skla. Nesli jsme je a oni nám dodávali jistotu. Dovolili jsme jim, aby nás prostoupili a cítili jsme, jak nás svou průzračností přetváří. A jak jsme tak vyvolávali ozvěny časů mimoných a nechávali zaznít temnotu za slovy, ať už se za nimi skrývalo cokoliv, bylo to, jako bychom přivolali i něco jiného, nějaký přízrak, který mezi nás vstoupil a přenášel ty křehké, blištivé střípky nás samotných od jednoho druhému. Byla to Karin, kdo mezi námi přenášel vzkazy a pocity jako nějaké křišťálové míse. V jejich básních se na stránkách zhmotňovaly lesy, květy v rozpuku, temná a bolavá zákoutí vědomí, a když byl překlad hotový, když jsme se dohodli, kde použít jaké slovo a jak je nejlépe pospojovat, navzájem jsme si je předčítali a říkali si, jo, a mysleli si, a takhle to je. Nakonec nejsme tak sami.
So I'm going to skip towards the end of the book, Karen, but I won't spoil. The book is a little bit difficult to explain and how the structure of it works, but it kind of moves backwards in time in places. And as it meets all of these ghosts along the way, the final ghost of the book is me. So we meet headed towards the end. But the book also deals with a number of people who have lost, and often people with very difficult mental health situations. And these come back in this passage as a series of ghosts. And we go back to the cemetery in Liverpool where we open the book. And so that's the setting again, that at the end it takes full circle. I took myself finally right down to the edge of the stone passage, just far enough that I could see the light of the moon on the gardens beyond the trees, and I was glad just to see it, to have a glimpse into that world, that past. As a teenager, I would have walked easily into the darkness, and in times of shock, I seemed to revert back to play out those earlier habits. Now, though, all that was changed. I wasn't numb enough to go back and not confident enough either. But just as I was about to leave, to turn around and take the roads through the city to the station, the wind picked up again, blowing up from the river and hurrying down into the gardens. I closed my eyes, steadying myself against it, and this time the wind was behind me, lifting my collar, billowing my coat. I kept my eyes closed, the gusts blustering around my head, until it felt for a moment as though I was not alone. And it felt as though there were other people, their shadows moving at either side of me, gathering me with them, lifting me forwards, bearing me on. I opened my eyes again and looked around. If I stared down into the cemetery, the glow of the street lamps behind me, and called out, what would come to me? Would the statues in the oratory wake? Would the graves begin to rupture? Was anybody there? And if there was, would I recognize any of them if they came out of that darkness and stepped towards me? What if it was myself, or that lost version of me, a flicker of the past? Would I know his face, and would he know mine? All that time I had been haunted by him, and still I hardly knew what that self was, that version of me that existed before the world had said, become, and I had answered in its language. I thought of Hopkins. This is the Hopkins poem that Daniela mentioned at the start. I thought of Hopkins, his line of men walking in the marsh air with their beams, following a lantern. At the end of the poem, it is Christ who watches them, whose heart wants them, whose care haunts them. And I quote, their ransom, their rescue, and first, fast, last friend. And then I remembered one of the last poems Karin Boyer ever wrote. Elias and I had translated it together. In the poem, she followed a procession, this time of women, dark angels with blue flames like fire flowers in their hair. And I'll read you another Karin Boyer translation. Those dark angels with blue flames like fire flowers in their black hair know the answers to blasphemous questions. And perhaps they know where the bridge goes from the depths of night to the day. And maybe they know the harbour of unity. And maybe in the Father's house there is a bright dwelling that has their name. Both of them hoped, one with certainty, one with longing, that there would be a place for those people, a friend to watch them, a room with their name above the lintel. But perhaps, after all, it should never be another place, never be another person. It should be here. The friends should be us. The Father's house should be our home. Standing at the foot of the pathway, I realized that maybe that was it, after all. Maybe I could call to them, could call to myself. In my body, in my deeds, in my words, I would set a fire burning for them. I would bring them home.
Nakonec jsem se odhodlala dojít až k začátku kamenné pěšiny, právě tak daleko, abych skrze stromy viděl, jak do zahrad za nimi dopadá měsíční světlo. A byl jsem za ten pohled, za možnost nahlédnout do světa, který byl dávno pryč, vděčný. Jako puberťák bych do temnoty vstoupil bez rozmýšlení a v situaci, kdy jsem byl v šoku, jsem mýval tendenci sklouznout zpátky ke starým zvynkům. Teď ale bylo všechno jinak. Nebyl jsem dostatečně ochromený, abych se vrátil, ani dost sebejistý, abych šel dál. Ale zrovna když jsem se chystal odejít, otočit se a vydat se městem k nádraží, zvedl se od řeky znovu vítr a hnal se do zahrad. Zavřel jsem oči a zapřel se nohama. Tentokrát jsem ho měl v zádech, zvedal mi límec a nadouval kabát. Nechal jsem oči zavřené a porivy větru mi hučely kolem hlavy, až jsem měl na chvíli pocit, jako bych tu nebyl sám. Jako by tu byli i další lidé, jejich stíny se mi míhaly po bocích, srocovali se kolem mě a nadnášeli mě směrem kupředu. Otevřel jsem oči a rozhlédl se kolem. Kdybych se upřeně zadíval na hřbitov a zavolal, září poulečních lamp v zádech, co by se stalo? Probudily by se sochy z kaple? Začaly by se portit hroby? Je tam někdo? A pokud ano, poznal bych někoho z nich, kdyby vyšli z temnoty a přistoupili blíž. Co kdybych to byl já? Nebo spíš dávno ztracená verze mě samotného? Záblesk minulosti. Poznal bych jeho tvář a poznal by on tu mou? Tak dlouho už mě straší a já pořád vlastně nevím, co jsem byl zač. Ta podoba mě samotného, která existovala předtím, než si jet řekl staniš se a já mu v jeho jazyce odpověděl. Myslel jsem na Hopkinse, na jeho verš o mužích kráčejících mokřinou za světlem lucerny. Na konci básně je to Kristus, kdo je pozoruje. Jehož srdce po nich touží a před jehož láskou není úniku. Výkupné, spása, věrný drah, první, poslední. A pak jsem si vzpomněl na jednu z posledních básní, kterou Karin Boyer napsal. S Eliasem jsme ji společně přeložili. V její básni také sledujeme procesí. Tentokrát se ale jedná o procesí žen, temných andělů s modrými plameny jako ohnivými květy, jež mají zapletené ve vlasech. Temní andělé s modrými plameny jako ohnivými květy v černočerných vlasech znají odpovědi na otázky kacířů a tuší snad, kam vede onen most, jenž klene se z hlubin noci do bdělého dne. A možná i znají ten přístav jednoty. A možná i najdou tam v otcovském domě prosluněný příbytek označený jejich jménem. Oba doufali, on s jistotou, ona s toužebnou nadějí, že se pro tyhle lidi najde místo, kde nad nimi bude bdít přítel. V útulné místnosti s jejich jménem nade dveřmi. Ale možná to nakonec nemá být někde jinde a někdo jiný. Mělo by se to stát tady. A oni přáteli, bychom měli být my samotní. A otcovský dům by měl patřit především nám. Jak jsem tam stál na začátku pěšiny, uvědomil jsem si, že možná takhle to nakonec je. Možná bych na ně mohl zavolat a přivolat jen k sobě. Udělat pro ně místo ve svém těle, ve svém jednání a slovech. Rozdělal bych pro ně v krbu oheň a přivedl je domů.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're moving on to poems now. And I have had to forgotten the order that I'm supposed to be reading of. So we're starting with December. Thank you, Daniela. So Martin and Daniela are going to come up and read the conclusions, which I can't wait to hear. I thought we'd start off, because it's December and happily it's snowing outside, with a poem called December. I imagine winter returning, as if woken from a dream.
Any bad?
I imagine winter returning, as if woken from a dream, clambering from the iced rabbit hole of the field, open-mouthed, the sound it makes coming home, knee-deep in the night, its slowed feet, the numb toes. I listen for the pain in the white shins of the birches, splinter trees charred by cold, limbs creaking. What is the sound of winter? Bark dropping wet-kneed beneath the laid-down lace of the snow. Where does it go? To the frost skin of the pond, where it grows itself, to the scales of the fish, which are its sequins, to the branches of the water in which it sits, spinning its own white water.
Prosinec. Probouzí se zima, dlanů do kořán, souká se z neznáma bílých polí jako ze sna. Pomalé šlépě, jak se brodí tmou, stuhlé prsty na nohou. Ozvou se bělostné holeně bříz a sténání soušek přešlých mrazem. Jak je slyšet zima? Jako mokrá kůra, jak voda kanoucí pod krajkovým sněhu. A kam odtud míří? Do pajetek šupin, ledové krusty na rybníku, tam narůstá a vrací se domů do odnoží vody, věčně roztáčejíc své bílé tělo.
This poem, I assume actually that, I don't know, does the title translate? It's a Latin title. So,
It does translate.
Yeah, great. So the title is Ilex, which is just the Latin word for the hole in the tree family. This poem has an epigraph because it's about breastfeeding, and when I first submitted it to a competition, the judges had the surprise levels in woman every time. So it has an epigraph after the birth of my nephew. Distracting myself, waiting for news, I walked until I saw this white cluster of honey growing at the base of a tree. The stems yellowed, the angled clutch of the leaves like a bleached coral, a pale antler, almost medieval, like a relic unearthing the gloom of the world. Later, still the baby would not latch, and I came back to this folly, unhardened by the sun, unable to turn the light into strength. May it keep its whiteness, may it never learn the use of spikes, or in time, when a crown is made of it, may the people approach one by one to witness how a fragile thing is raised.
Cesmína po narození synovce. Čekal jsem na zprávu, byl jsem jak na trní a bloumal bez cíle, než se mi zjevil bílý trs cesmíny pod starým stromem. Nažloutlé kmínky, sevřené dlaně listů jako blednoucí korály, přízračné paroží málem středověké, rostla tam ze země jak relikvie v lesní tmě. Když potom dítě nechtělo pít, vrátil jsem se sem. Nezocelená sluncem neumí ještě proměnit světlo v sílu. Ať jen zůstane bledá a nepozná nikdy, k čemu má ostny, nebo ať z ní časem uvíjí korunu. A lidé přicházejí jeden po druhém, aby uviděli, jak křehkost prospívá a sílí.
All right, so join the chest of bread.
Okay, this is a long one, I'm afraid. This poem takes its title, it's called Dryad, which is kind of a tree.
Does that make this minus?
It is a tree in Greek mythology. A spiritual nymph that would sit or protect a tree, usually an oak tree. So this poem starts off with a statue carved from a tree, the statue of a wood. It's also quite wintry times.
Okay. I do feel sorry that Martin didn't translate such a long poem. Now that is
Dryad. I remember her covered in stone, in a field where each dead stalk of wildflower was thick with frost. The sky was pink in the hawthorns, the day held on the light edge of breaking. A woman carved from the bole of an oak, her feet, if she had any, buried in the winter's shedding weight. Whoever had turned her from the tree had given her an oar, which she held in both hands, close to the gentle curve of her face. And she stood there by the half-rotten stile of Broad Lane, head bowed, as though waiting to greet us and offer the frozen circumference of a new world. Years ago, our school had planted the woods behind her when I was 8 or 9, and now each tree ages alongside us. Each time I go back, I see a part of my life laid out, still growing in a field by the old village. And I used to come here often, at 18 or so, with men at night, and it was strange to pass her as we stumbled in the undergrowth and into the woods like deer plummeting through the wet branches. And I think now of all the men forced outside after clearing out into the dark spaces of towns, how they walk in vigil to woodlands and old estates, to the smell of the day settling. Once I came here with a man whose whole body was muscled, as though he too had been carved from a single trunk of wood. I pretended all the time to be a man like him, answering each lie in a deep, alien voice. I think I was afraid he would kill me, and walked a few steps ahead, hearing him moving through solemn breaths, pulling his feet from the vines. We passed the woman without comment, though she stood there in a cloak of wood, the glow held in the lathed green of her hands. Here was so unlike the places other people went, a place without doors or walls or ribbons. The black, heavy-leafed branches pulled back like a curtain, and inside a dark chamber of the wood, guarded and made safe. The bed was the bed of all the plants and trees, and we could share it. And then the kneeling down in front of him, keeping my secrets still in the folds of night, trying not to shake in the cold, and the damp floor seeping up, I remember the cold water spreading in the capillaries of my jeans. As I looked up, the sky hidden under a rain of leaves, each tree stood over me in perfect symmetry with his body. Each was like a noun with his head bent, each watching and moving and making a slow, laboured sighs. And I came back often, year on year, kneeling and being knelt for in acts of secret worship. And now each woodland smells quietly of sex, not only when the air is thick with it, but in winter too, when the strings are grounded and held against the earth. And each time I half expect to meet someone among the trees or inside the empty skeleton of the rhododendron. And I wonder if I have ruined these places for myself, if I have brought each secret to them and weighed the trees with things I could no longer bear. But then I think, what is a tree or a plant, if not an act of kneeling to the earth, a way of bidding the water to move, of taking in the mouth the inner part of the world and coaxing it out, not just the aching leaf buds in spring, the cloud of pollen, or in autumn the children knocking the branches for the shower of seed, but the people who kneel in the woods at night, the woman waiting by the gate, offering to each visitor a small portion of the world in which they might work for the light to drink.
Driáda. Vzpomínám, jak stála celá zesněžená tam na poli, kde mrtvé stonky lučních květů stěžkly mraze. Oblova v loží růžověla a den už visel na hraní světu. Žena vyřezaná z dubového kamene s nohama a kdo ví jestli, pohřbenýma v té zimní tíži. Kdo tomu stromu vtiskl její podobu, jí podaroval i jakousi koulí, kterou držela v dlaních blízko jemné obliny vlastní tváře. A tak tam stál, s hlavou skrnilou, u schnilého žebříku poblíž Drought Lane, jako by nás čekala a vrtela u zamrzlých hranic toho nového světa. Před lety, bylo mi tak 8-9, jsme za ní se školou šli sázet les. A od té doby ty stromy stárnou s námi. Pokaždé, když se tam vracím, mám tak před očima kus vlastního života, jak roste na poli u staré vesnice. Často jsem tudy, když mi bylo kolem 18, chodíval v noci s muži a přišlo mi zvláštní klopítat kolem ní pod růstem směrem k lesu, jako když se mi prolamují mokré větve. Myslím teď na všechny ty muže vyhnané ven do temných koutů měst, jak za noci bloumají po lesech a starých domech, dokud neucítí závan dne. Byl jsem tu kdysi s jedním, co měl tělo samý sval, jak kdyby ho také někdo vyřezal z jednoho kusu dřeva. Po celou dobu jsem předstíral, že se mu podobám a na každou lež odpovídal hlubokým cizím hlasem. Snad jsem měl strach, že mě zabije, a tak šel pár kroků před ním a poslouchal, jak se za mnou broudí trávou a jak nohama zachytává otevří. Prošli jsme mlčky kolem dřevěné ženy, přestože tam stála v plášti a s koulí v zelené kružbě svých klání. Ostatní chodili nebo celé náměsta. Zde nebyly dveře, stěny ani pokoje. Závis černých, hustě obrostlých větví se rozhrnul a odhalil temnou lesní komnatu, střeženou a bezpečnou. Na místo postele rozestlaná zem, patřící rostlinám, stromům i nám. A pak jsem před ním poklekl, ukryl svá tajemství v záhybech noci a snažil se netřást zimou, když pak mnou ze země vslínalo vlhko. Ještě cítím tu studenou vodu, jak se rozlévá kapilár jedžin. Když jsem shlédl, oblohu zakryl déšť, listí a každý strom se ke mně skláněl v dokonalém souladu s sibotylem. Připomínali muže se skloněnou hlavou, každý z nich se díval, kýval se a stěžka stál. Častokrát jsem se vracel, rok co rok jsem poklekal a jiní klekali přede mnou v tom nábožném pokoji. A teď je každý les tiše cítit sexem. A nejen tehdy, když jim těžkne vzduch, ale i v zimě, kdy se napětí skrývá v zemi zatížené hlínou. A pokaždé tak trochu čekám, že někoho potkám mezi stromy, nebo tam v prázdné kostře pínišníku a přemýšlím, jestli jsem si neskalil ta místa, kam jsem přitáhl všechna svá tajemství a zatížil stromy tím, co už jsem nedokázal snést. Protože co pak není strom, či rostlina v podstatě pokleknutím k zemi. Způsob, jak přimět vodu, aby se pohnula, jak vzít do úst niternou část světa a vylákat jí ven. Nejsou to jen na jaře bolavé pupeny, oblaka pilu nebo pak na podzim spršky semen, které díky se třásejí z větví, ale také lidé, kteří za noci poklekají v lesích, a žena Bránky, co nabízí předchozím malý kus světa, v němž mohou žít až na jeho dřeň.
Two Tibetan teachers thought that's bad.
So, Tongues of Fire, the poetry collection is split into 4 parts. I think you've heard from 2 parts of the book now. The final part is a series of, but they're not quite elegies. But when I'd finished writing the book, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and died a couple of months later. But I had the chance then to insert a new section of the book, which were poems written between the time of him being diagnosed and passing away. So they're not elegies, but they kind of are about death in that way. Anyway, this poem is called In the Border Museum, which is just a museum in Berlin. In that museum there is a stone kind of portrait of a cardinal, which was damaged during fire in the Second World War. So the portrait is still there in the gallery, but his face is kind of half fallen off with fire damage, and so this poem is about that portrait as well. It's called In the Border Museum. On a narrow plinth in the corner of the gallery, a stone portrait, a man, his mouth unlit by fire, marble of the face peeled off in the blaze. But the clothes were spared somehow, as though above the neck he was hung on a noose of flame. And still one unsilent eye, looking up over the broken shoulder to where his sculptor stood. But hush, no one is coming. We are handed our lives by fierce work. Onto which blank space will I lock my gaze when my father is gone? How am I to wear his love's burning mantle?
Vodeho muzeum. Na úzkém soklu v rohu galerie kamenný portrét. Jakýsi muž, jemuž oheň sloupnul rty a v žáru strhal mramor z tváře. Však šaty tu kdo ví, jak zůstaly celé, jak kdyby zahrdlo visel v plamenné obrázce. A tím nesežehlým okem stále vzhlíží přes lámané rameno tam, kde stával, kdo jej vysochal. Tiše, nikdo nejde. K životu přicházíme divokým dílem, do které prázdnoty upřu svůj zrak, když můj otec už tady není. Jak jen mám nést hořící břivně jeho lásky.
I think we've reached the final poem, so I just want to say thank you very much again for listening.
Is it being fun balls?
Yeah.
All?
2 of them. Oh, talk fuck us up. False alarm.
Please, I'll find it for you.
Okay. A bonus poem. So I'd like to. So this is a poem called Tar Prong, which is a temple in the Angkor complex in Cambodia. maybe but no anchor what, but one of the unattendables is called Talbot. And if you've seen photos of it, it is held up by trees now. It would otherwise fall down, but the trees have grown through the temple and the definitely hold it up. And the two sorts of tree are silk, cotton, and strangler fig. So this is another poem from the final section of the book. It's called Talbot. To be slaying with the gus. I guess it's a temple, and that's useful to know. And these temples have various kind of set features, one of which is called the House of Fire. So every temple in that complex has building out the front, that's with the House of Fire. A stifling heat, the air heavy, and all around the loud, wet forest, knotting in the gaps in its own sound. A peace long earned, then broken, and you far off in the hospice bed. Silk cotton, strangler fig fastened here on the temple as though it glued down from heaven, was sent to hold in place all this human work. And later, through the House of Fire, the fallen galleries, I climbed in blue smoke to where the god sat, ringed with incense. And yes, I knelt to her, and yes, I prayed through unbelief. Perhaps now, Father, only something cold and impossible can save us.
Tátro. Jak vzal klíči, stěžklý vzduch a všude kolem hlučný, vlhký prales zaceluje díry ve vlastním zvuku. Zasloužený klid a je rázen pryč. A ty ležíš v posteli v dalekém hospice. Veliká cejba a fíkovník se tu lepí ke zdi krámu, jak kdyby dorostli sem z nebes s úkolem udržet pohromadě celé to lidské dílo. Špahal jsem pak přes dům a zřícené ochozy do modrého dýmu, kde seděla bohyně povínčená kadidlem. Ano, poklekl jsem. Ano, modlil se. Vzdor nejířivosti. Možná tati, že nás teď může zachránit jen něco starého a nemožného.
And now it's the last.
So, yeah, wild garlic and how many in Cheshire?
We do that before. That's a different name.
Okay,
Okay, different. It's a different poem.
okay, right. Okay. So, well, this flower or plant, it's called in English wild garlic, and you'll find out what it is when Daniela reads a poem. But the only thing to know is really that it smells very strongly of garlic, and it has little spiked white flowers. So this is the last poem. So thank you very much for this. Wild garlic.
And after acting,
Out in the copse after rain, too late after dark to be here. Warm soil, wood lice dripping from the underside of leaves. I root down to the tender stalks and twist them free. Soaked petals dip and touch white arm, kernels of bud, itch of foliage, of wildness on my skin. The plants are carrying the smell, earth rich, too heavy to lift above head height, and my boots and jeans are bleach with it. I turn home, and all across the floor, the spiked white flowers light the way. The world is dark, but the wood is full of stars.
they will come to a point where there will be occasion for another round of applause. But that isn't from to read the translation, the last translation first. Medvědí česy. Za deště blesíku za městem je dávno tma, neměl bych tu být. Hlína je vlhká a spod listů pleskají o zem stínky. Zašátrám úpaty tenkých stonků a jemně zatáhnu. Orosené květenství se zhoupne a otřese mi o ruku, palička tupene, řízná teď lístků na mé kůži. Těžké aroma se válí při zemi, zalézá mi do bot, vzlíná nohavicemi. Obrátím se k domovu a kolem se rozsvítí hroty bílých kvítků. Místo světa černá tma, jen les bliká hvězdami.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'd be
to answer that.
or you're welcome to come and just ask me after. So it's less pressure.
That's also an option. Also, while you're thinking of more questions, there will be an opportunity to buy the collection and the memoir. Petra and Lucia have kindly offered to take care of the sale. So, yeah.
Yeah, so they're on the
Find them, and yes, they are there. And there are only 3 copies of the collection and only very few copies of the, yeah.
I had to bring in Ryanair with them.
And also I hear, I'm from a different generation, so I wouldn't know, but there is an option to actually, cash would be brilliant, but you have an option.
Yeah, I just if Revolut, I don't know if you use Revolut, but if you have it, then you don't have cash.
Never heard of it.
And it's easy to pay via Revolut.
And cash is that's me. But yeah, questions? But maybe I have one.
Oh, yeah.
For the starters, when we were talking after the lecture yesterday, enjoying lunch with friends and Lenka and Martin, you were talking about translation.
Yeah.
And how, of course, it's difficult to translate poetry, it's impossible.
Yeah.
But it's extremely difficult to translate your prose well.
Okay.
And you said it that something that I totally understood, not just reading your memoir with my own in your voice, that maybe it's the longest poem that you have ever written.
Yeah.
And now, when you were reading it out loud today, it totally made sense. Absolutely, I didn't notice how difficult something it actually was. But I would still like to ask a question about it before your poems. Because the Poppin seems to be one of the important influences, but we don't find many sonnets.
No.
Not that he would write standard sonnets, but so the 4-line stanza or the 3-line stanza seems to be your theme.
Yeah.
Yet when you start writing the poem, do you already had a shape in mind, or how?
I have banned myself from 3-line stanzas now because I think I began to think in 3-line stanzas, which made the poems come out in similar ways after a while. The thing I like about a 3-line stanza is I kind of imagine it like, I've tried to describe this before, but you know those things that you used to pour champagne down, but are like a spiral piece of metal? Well, like, do you know this? I kind of think of that with or like a chain, like an interlinked chain, because you always drop off the end of a 3-line stanza. I don't tend to end the sentence at the end of the stanza. So if you want to make a reader, if you want to pull them through a long poem, one good way is to not let them stop. So if they always have to go into the next stanza because you don't have a full stop, then you kind of trap them in the prose. So that was one thing, and I like the musicality of it because you can rhyme across a stanza then and drop things down, and it's really about flow for me. And It's really and a four-line stanza is much more static, I think, or much more meditative. So if I want the poem to kind of go on a journey, I tend to use a three-line stanza because it seems like a journeying form. And a four-line stanza seems to be like a moment of reflection because you stop, or you have kind of this little thing. So often they kind of emerge like that, but I tend to just write out. I actually usually kind of write a big block of prose first, and then begin to figure out and edit it into a poem afterwards. I tend to think if I did start to write the poem into a form, I just want to fill the form up, so I could never really write a sonnet knowing that I was going to write a sonnet, if that makes sense. Because I'm just kind of either adding new things to get to 40 lines or not including all the stuff I need to include because I've cut myself off. So no, I don't really do that and it received faults in that, but I'm not the sort of artist that could write a villain out very well.
So you never know.
You never know, but although actually at the moment I've got stuck on ballads. So I can write that. Short ballads will be up to there, but in the ballad form, I think it's the music that always gets me first, so the rhythm in the ballad.
The one started like that, but the one that runs out.
Yeah. So.
Thank you, Arnold. Coincidence. You're on it, not that they're great in German. Well, maybe we have talked about the most would remember the title of the memoir.
Yeah.
And there is the poem, Lantern Out of Doors, has been translated into Czech. It's included in that collection of translations by Ivan Slavík and Vio Preisner. And the title of the poem is Lampa tam tenka. You don't get those four words next to each other in the translation.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Actually. But could you say a few words about the title of the collection?
Yeah. Of the collection? The Tones of Fire.
Both of them?
Yeah. So Tones of Fire, it has a kind of dual meaning, in that it has this kind of Pentecostal meaning of learning new voices, or kind of a spiritual element to it. But also on the cover of the collection is this fungus which grows out of juniper. Juniper bushes, and its common name in English is tongues of fire, so it looks like tongues of fire. But I like this idea of kind of the word bursting out of the natural object, or kind of this spiritual speech through the matter of the world. And there is the final poem in the book that's called Tongues of Fire as well. So that's where that came from. And All Down Darkness Wide, I kind of liked the fact that I didn't really know what it meant. And when I took it out, the thing I loved most was the rhythm of it. So the book, as I mentioned, goes kind of hit us back in time. And I liked this idea of writing something that went into the underworld or went back in time. So that All Down Darkness, that kind of sounds like stepping down to me. And then the wide, it's like a lucky opening out, like a sort of freedom at the end of it, or a brightness. So that's kind of gave me, it encapsulated what I wanted the book to feel like as well, that it would go down into darkness and then it would open up into something free or lighter. But yeah, I mean, you could take any quote out of Hopkins and it sounds great. You have no idea what it means. So I liked that about the title, but it was the idea of following a sort of light, or in the poem there's a man with a lantern that's kind of wandering off, and all these figures or men are following him into the darkness. And I like that idea that the book would be kind of following an idea into the darkness. It's sort of what I came back, Chris. So that's where the title came from. It's very right to your thought about it.
I did it down.
Just a good question about the ballads. Are you thinking of doing a whole collection of those? I don't
think anyone would enjoy that. They just I'm only allowing myself at 2 in the next book. But there were more. But it's sort of one of those things that's kind of like having, I find when there are certain poems for certain rhythms that when I read them, I start to, it's like a violence that gets inside you and you can't stop. So, for example, if you spend a lot of time reading Emily Dickinson, I want to write, the poems start to come out like Emily Dickinson approach, she gets in your head. Likewise, the ballads, I found that every time I would write a first line, it just happened to be in the ballad meter. I was like, oh, here we go again. And things just kind of trick off like that. But the difficulty with a song meter is that they can push you into a sort of triteness that you want to avoid, certainly. But there's kind of a nice tension because you're kind of inside the music of the band and like the fighting against it when you're inside. So I kind of like the idea and then it's a bit the challenge.
Right. Well, the question that I have 2 questions and they probably agree to do it and you probably get a lot of these kinds of first of all, what is the biggest source of inspiration? Is it that nature or people? And then secondly, what is your favorite word or do you have any coinages?
Oh, I think inspiration is a hard thing to quantify, but if I could talk about my process, that probably helps, which is often I will have a feeling or an idea that I want to write about, but no way of writing about it because I don't have a physical thing to attach it to. So I could write just pure emotions, but they don't really feel like anything like read. So I tend to go on like long walks and take photos and make notes and things like that of just things that I see, and then use that as a kind of a metaphor through which the feeling comes. So often it's kind of a synergy between the two things, but nature is kind of the thing that unlocks it. My favorite word, oh God. Well, actually at the moment I'm quite enjoying the words. I not really thought I'd catch between them, but words like nightfall, like all in one word. I think it looks pretty. Or a whole windowsill. And maybe they have a kind of connection, but yeah. I don't think I really have a particular favorite word. But yeah, also at the moment, you just said about you're giving away my secrets, but rap has become an actual fascinating word for the dual meanings of kind of ecstasy and also the end of the word. So I kind of like that. But okay, thank you.
We have a post. They will prepare. What's called for fall?
Yeah. Sorry, that was a cryptic hint that never let a playroom. Yeah. Rapture. Okay.
Really?
Wrap up? Yeah. Well, can I say thank you, really to you also for translating that and driving off for comment. It's always a real privilege to have someone spend so much time and focus on the process. So thank you. I look forward to speaking with you after it's going to get a drink, and the books are available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for treating us to a wonderful evening and to a brilliant lecture yesterday. And we are really honored to have you over. It's when I approached you, was it in spring or a year ago? I don't know. I mentioned it to a colleague from abroad, and they said, "Oh, he won't come. He's a famous person."
That's a pleasure for coming. And I'm not famous.
So, thank you very much. Please join me again in a round of applause. So much.